If you had known 10 years ago that 2015 would be a great year to be an Earthbound fan, you would have been crazy. Although Nintendo has not been busy not releasing Mother games in English for the past 2 decades, we finally had an official release of Mother 1 happen in spring of this year. But by that time, the fans had already caught up. Though the development of Earthbound was a massive struggle at its time, and it resulted in the next game being stuck in over a decade of development hell, it's hard to look back at it and see what it was doing that couldn't be done nowadays with a team of just 3 or 4 guys and a copy of RPG Maker. Because Earthbound isn't a technological marvel, it's a tone, it's a flavor of humor and visuals that indulge in the fun of video games while hinting at the bittersweet fun of real life. It's stiff animation and dad jokes. It's video game deadpan. In 2 interviews during Earthbound's development, the game's writer, Shigesato Itoi, repeatedly says that the games drew inspiration from his real-life experiences and acquaintances, and that the ultimate message to kids playing would actually be one encouraging them to stop playing so much and go have fun outside instead. The stories that are written into these games come from episodic short vignettes that are less about the epic adventures the characters are going on and more about gauging the player's own reaction from seeing something weird before you just move on to the next weird thing. It breaks the 4th wall and brandishes a strange sense of self-awareness far before Metal Gear Solid played up the same shtick for shocks rather than laughs. As a hardcore fantasy JRPG that also takes place in a sleepy modern American suburb with a supremely light difficulty level, Earthbound is all about subverting expectations and contradicting cliches. It doesn't take anything about itself seriously except for those core rules that define its flavor. Charmingly bad jokes, stiff, unstylish visuals, and a bittersweet outlook on life. And that's why even the most jarring of fan tributes can still do it justice. Compared to the occasionally dark but otherwise kid-friendly games it's based on, 2014's Lisa, the painful RPG, has a sense of humor and subject matter that is downright rancid. And unlike Earthbound, the game's story is more of a fantasy, I guess. It's a Children of Men situation where the post-apocalyptic future is a sausage fest of sweaty, hairy fat men and the occasional Cronenberg. But the story behind them is not as important as the gauntlet of punishing, ruthlessly brutal, and usually nonsensical situations that the game wrings you through. It's actually quite horrifying. But despite everything, it keeps its head up and maintains a hearty sense of black humor that might have you laughing at all kinds of depraved bullshit. That kind of humor leans close to Earthbound, as does the fact that the final boss of Earthbound was this developer's primary inspiration. It's got stiff artwork, bad jokes, and a dedication to subverting expectations. It has a tone that's all over the place with highs and lows, laughs and gasps, and a combo input battle system that has you swinging in and out of wrestling moves. But its insistence on shocking the player comes at a price. A zigzagging difficulty curve and frustrating levels built for extensive and uneventful backtracking really drag down the first few hours, before things start to smooth out later on. What seems to be intended as a brisk exploration of the crushing loneliness that is overcompensated masculinity has a broken economy, overpowered bosses placed long after save points, and gameplay scenarios that are clearly, deliberately built to be unfair. But some quirkiness is always to be expected when playing something like Earthbound. And when doing these games back to back, it's pretty amazing how much more polished Undertale manages to be. Okay, this game is $10, it's one of the best games of the year, and you have my blessing to dive right into it right now. Because if you've had the magic and the wonder and the discovery of games ruined by the media miasma surrounding them, then Undertale is for you. And you don't need people like myself pointing a wind vane towards where your expectations should go when you play this thing. Play it without spoilers, play it by yourself, play it without knowing what you're in for. If you miss the feeling of having your dad bring home some weird thing from Blockbuster that you just had to accept and enjoy, then Undertale will solve that problem for you. Undertale deserves that feeling. There's a link in the description, it's $10, sell your Steam cards for a discount. Hell, there's a free demo for it too, because you'll learn more about the game there than you will here. So if you haven't played the game, check the demo out. Give it a few runs. I'm waiting. It's free. Toby Fox really loves Mother games. He made ROM hacks of them for a few years, and then when he went and made Undertale, he loaded it up with Actually, after going through footage, I can't find a whole lot of straight Earthbound references. The inspiration is clear, though. There are parallels everywhere. The main character is a little kid in a striped shirt, there's a hidden village of annoying scrappy-doo sidekicks who speak in a crazy font, and a whole game of feel-good, uplifting quirk that suddenly takes a turn towards fourth-wall-shattering nightmare fuel at the ending. And it's also built from the ground up, almost as an engine itself for subverting RPG cliches. The combat system, which is often your primary means of interacting with anything in a video game, has extensive moves and strategies planned out here for pacifist playthroughs. Confusing, demoralizing, or befriending enemies is usually more satisfying than beating them up, and oftentimes a more deep and complex process too. Several enemies have enough versatility built onto their moves and writing for entire subplots to begin and end inside the battle screen. And that's why I think it's so important to go into this game without knowing about that system at all. If you even looked at the Kickstarter page or the website and saw that crazy pacifist combat was this game's big deal, then you blew it. Mechanical twists critical of the audience are common enough nowadays, but this is an uncommon example of that twist actually working on an interactive level because there's enough rules in the systems there to actually justify the game's criticism of your violence. That criticism doesn't feel forced because your violence is not forced. Not at all. Plus, the non-violent route provides well enough of the twitchy and stressful needs that has defined good old traditional video game gameplay too. This live televised battle to the not death has you posing and leering at the audience, playing for ratings while playing to lower that HP meter just enough to also play the boss's invisible metered pacifism endurance points as well. Despite an incredibly simple interface, things get pretty complicated. You gotta do a little bit of shmupping, and you gotta keep your inventory filled way too much with healing items if you're never gonna get any EXP or level up. And the situations that pacifist takedowns lead to don't often make sense. But that's great. It's a more interesting and accessible pacifist run than just running away or sneaking around enemies, because the whole game feels like it was designed to subvert that very cliché. The cliché of needing to and having to kill enemies, and hell, it subverts even the idea of a separate pacifist run being a brave, creative, alternative, self-imposed challenge too. In Undertale, pacifism is an equally viable and only slightly more difficult way to play. And it helps that those creative and satisfying mechanics are attached to some of the funniest writing, the most danceable music, and one of the most charming and confident packages in years. In fact, had this come out in 1995 instead, it would have been just as influential a force as its own influence was. It's an unconventional RPG with stiff animation, first-person battles, bad puns, and an overwhelming amount of humanity. It delivers the highs and lows of a good-humored story, one that wouldn't work if it followed convention and played it safe. Earthbound is subversion, and with all the crazy quality put into Undertale's writing and its multiple battle systems, it doesn't just pay homage to Earthbound. In several ways, it exceeds it, managing to get away with things people had no idea how to do in 1995 on about 1/100th of the budget. Just like the game it's based on, Undertale is flamboyantly confident with its lack of any kind of noisy visual style or fancy graphics. It's a kind of quiet reminder about what games can be by pointing out what they haven't been, and what's out there in the world outside of them.